traveling and living in different cultures is like a broad university. The more you learn about different cultures, the more enriched you can be.
When you live in a different place, clock your biases and reflect on them, let them go.
Sport gives you like a lot of mental strength. It's not even your body that is going to take you there, but it's actually your mind. Success is not around economic well-being, or more about what we feel and live and experience.
Possibly happiness is a good estimate of success.
Investing in the early years is the best investment you can do.
Welcome back to another episode of the EdHeroes Voices podcast, where we bring you inspiring stories and insights from educational leaders around the world. I'm your host today, Alina Baimen, and today we have an extraordinary guest, Cecilia Vaca Jones. Cecilia is a senior advisor to Abu Dhabi Early Childhood Authority, former executive director of the Bernard van Leer Foundation, and a valued member of the EdHeroes Advisory Board. Originally from Ecuador, Cecilia has worked extensively in the Netherlands and now resides in Abu Dhabi. Welcome, Cecilia.
Thank you, Alina. And of course, it's a great pleasure to be here and to share thoughts and ideas today.
Thank you so much. I mean, you have such an extensive background. Could you please tell us a little bit more of your 25 years in social development and other work experience? What has first inspired you to enter this field?
I think that the fact that I'm Ecuadorian and, Ecuador is a beautiful country in South America, but of course we have a lot of social challenges. And I think, and I remember since I was very little, I was very much interested in which is the best way that I can contribute to social justice. So I even remember, back in high school, I would always be interested in doing work with minority groups. So that's how I started getting very interested in working with indigenous communities in my country that represented around 35% of the population of Ecuador. And then I did a lot of work with Afro-American, with Afro-Ecuadorian communities. And of course, I think that kind of like shaped my purpose in life. And I guess that I think very early in my life, I understood that I wanted to work for social justice. And then I was very lucky that when I was 18 years old, I did an exchange program in Belgium. So I lived 1 year in a little town close to Brussels. It's a little town that's called Quebec. And, I still remember that my host family took me to watch a documentary in Ecuador. And I went to see this documentary. And, it was interesting because they kind of like feature Ecuador as a very poor country. And it was like the phase of poverty that I didn't kind of like felt identified with that phase of poverty. And for me, it was like, why are they showing this about Ecuador? Why aren't they showing like all the natural richness that we have, all the cultural richness that we have? Why are they putting us in this one way of seeing the world? So very early on in my life, so I was probably then 18 years old. I remember that I told my host family, and actually they still remember that. I remember I told them I want to go back to Ecuador, and I want to make sure that whatever I do contributes to change this image of Ecuador, but also contributes to change the situation or unfair situations that I might find in my country. And I think it goes beyond my country. For me, the scope of social justice actually is around everywhere.
That's very interesting just to see, your country or your childhood, where you're from, portrayed through the eyes of someone else who we often don't identify with that image. And I think it's quite beautiful that this is the decision that you had. It was a conscious choice to change, to take action and to go forward. You've had an extremely diverse background in terms of where you lived and traveled. You lived in Ecuador and the Netherlands. You're now living in Abu Dhabi. Very different culturally, geographically. Are there any kind of differences that really stood out to you?
And I guess I've also, as I mentioned, I also lived in Belgium, and I also studied and lived in the US. I also studied and lived in Italy. And I guess I feel very fortunate that I've been exposed to live in different cultures, in different cities, in different contexts, in different situations as well, right? When you're a student, you probably have a complete different life that when you're experiencing like a pretty senior professional experience. And of course, that kind of like shapes the way that you experience a place. That's very important is that for me, like traveling and living in different places has definitely been like one of the best opportunities in my life. And I always say that traveling and living in different cultures is like a broad university that is constantly teaching you about so many things. And I guess my one of my most important learnings is about cultural differences and really getting to know and appreciate everything of each of the cultures where you get a chance to live. And if I may, maybe probably the fact that I'm also a product of a multicultural marriage because my father's Ecuadorian. My mother was born in Argentina, but my grandparents were British. So I think that that mix of cultures from very early on in my life also kind of like made me appreciate the diversity of cultures. And then as I was growing up and I was sharing with you, I was also very interested in the diversity of cultures that I have in my own country. So Ecuador is a country that has 13 different nationalities. So we have a lot of diversity of indigenous populations and also of the Afro-Ecuadorian populations. And each of the cultures brings a lot of values that for me are very important. So I always like to relate cultures to important values that we should all learn about because I really kind of like learn to appreciate the cultures because of the values that they can promote. And again, you really need to experience those cultures to understand those values. So for me, what's most important whenever we get into these debates, what are the important things about cultures that we need to keep? I always my immediate answer would be like, let's make sure that we're talking about cultures. We're also talking about the values, the traditions, the things that people want to keep as core of their identity and their way of living and seeing the world. And in particular, I think that my work with indigenous populations in Ecuador really made me appreciate the diversity of cultures because I was able to do a lot of work, especially with the Andean indigenous populations in Ecuador. And, you know, in Ecuador, we even talk about having like an Andean cosmovision and Andia because of the Andes. And it's this way of seeing the world because of the way they relate to the ecosystem and to nature and to the mountains. And I learned a lot from them. And I think that marked my life in such a deep way that I believe that one of my characteristics of loving nature and loving the environment and just seeing nature as a living creature is a big part of who I am. And I do think this is also a big part of our indigenous cultures and what I believe we should all learn about. So having said this, then when I moved to all the different countries that I've lived in, you know, when I moved to Belgium and I had to learn the language and I needed to start speaking French. Also, like speaking a language is something that really connects you to culture because there are many things about language that are again very much related to the way we see the world and that they're very authentic and unique to the way that we think. So for me, learning French and learning to live in Belgium was also like a very enriching from many different perspectives. Then when I was able to live in the US and I was a student there and I also was able to share with friends of many different nationalities and live in a student dorm, I think that was also very enriching for me because it's also understanding that the United States also because of its history has also like a very interesting culture that it can be very different from my culture in Ecuador and from Latin American culture. And then moving to Italy, again, all of the different experiences and living as a student and understanding, for example, the way of living in Italy and this access to the public spaces, to the public services, to enjoying life and simple things of life, such as food and you know this connections between people and communities. For me, was one of the deepest experiences. Also, that made me love Italian culture very deeply, and I think still Italy is one of my favorite countries in the world. Then in the Netherlands, again, you know, in the Netherlands, it was very different because I was there working. And of course, the culture of working in the Netherlands can be very different from that we had in Latin America. You know, Dutch would plan things at least 8 months in advance. I mean, the working culture can be very different than in other places. I will never forget that, for example, in the Netherlands, it was the first time in my life that I heard the term burnout. This was not a topic that we would ever talk about in Ecuador. It doesn't mean that it didn't exist, but probably in the case of Ecuador, we just didn't have the privilege to have a burnout. While in the Netherlands, the burnout culture is something that you listen a lot about. But again, it's a very interesting country with very interesting things from a culture perspective. I love their biking culture. You know, they move everywhere using their bicycles. It has also been very enriching.
Did
And
you
now,
also use a bike to move around?
yes, I love, I always say like um life is like a bicycle. In order to be alive, you got to keep moving, right? In order to keep the balance, you got to keep moving. I think it was Einstein's quote. And I definitely think it's true, like a bicycle is one of the best solutions that could help solve so many problems around the world from an environmental perspective, from a health perspective, from a connection perspective. So nothing to say that I definitely love cycling, but the culture of cycling in the Netherlands is really amazing. Now living in Abu Dhabi, Alina, which I do want to share because I think it's also been one of the most beautiful experiences in my life. I guess that when I first moved to Abu Dhabi, I had a lot of the stigmas about how my life in Abu Dhabi would be like as a woman living in a Muslim country. And I must say that Abu Dhabi has shown me a beautiful culture, the most generous culture, the most respectful culture, the most caring culture. I feel people in Abu Dhabi care about my well-being. They're constantly, just making sure that I'm doing well, that I'm enjoying my life here. I have many Emirati friends, and they just are the most beautiful and generous people who are very proud of their roots, of the way they have built this country. So for me, it has been really interesting to also learn about the culture here, about Arabic culture, about Arabic values that are also very much anchored in religion, which I think it's also very important to learn, right? Like I was born and raised as a Catholic, but also living in a country that you feel there's a lot of tolerance to the diversity of backgrounds, to the diversity of religions. It's actually very beautiful. I wish that we could enforce more this way of living and thinking and embracing diversity in a way that we can all learn more about each other. Because for me, experiencing culture has to do with learning and understanding how different cultures are, where are different values, why are we setting different values based on what we believe and what we are. And I think it has really changed my way of thinking and being, maybe. But yes, so every place, just maybe to summarize, because it's a long story, but I think that every place where I have lived has really contributed to make me a better human being and to really kind of embrace diversity in a way that I can just say that the more you learn about different cultures, the more you are able to really feel it. I think the more tolerant you are, but also the more enriched you can be from the different experiences that you live and the different values that you could share with every and each culture you are able to experience. So it's all about living, experiencing, being open to respect other ways of seeing the world and understanding many different topics.
I love that. And I definitely agree with, when you visit, when you live in a different place, being open and trying to clock your biases and understand them, reflect on them, let them go. Because just like you said, living in a new country coming in, we all have certain expectations, maybe, or prejudice that very often proven wrong. And I think a lot of people, especially now, will kind of relate to you in a way, being a third culture kid for you, for a lot of people growing up. For myself personally, my mother being Russian, my father being from Kazakh, being completely different religions, so raised Muslim and Christian, along with my mother's side of the family being Jewish, living in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, North America, and Europe. And yeah, and a lot of friends I have are like that, and we all pick up accents, easily. Just, the code switching, our food preferences are a little bit different just because, we
And
can,
because the
right?
world is also moving towards that, right? Like a part of this globalization has also means that we have globalized love in a way. So there are more and more like multicultural, relationships and friendships. And I also think this allows us to grow our knowledge and understanding of diversity.
Absolutely, I agree. Kind of makes us appreciate a lot of things more, and rather than leaning one way or another, you treat every side of it with respect, every culture with dignity, with kindness, and you take in. Um, Sometimes, when you're younger, you take in certain things without really realizing what they are or giving them the attention. But as you grow up, you learn to appreciate and really honor those bits. So, yeah, I mean, I love also, it's really incredible how you picked up on so many different languages while you're living in different places. I mean, I'm sure that also helped you with the culture. And you touched upon a little
Yes.
bit on, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that, when you learn a language, I think it's almost like overcoming a barrier, right? Like, because you really kind of, you're able to communicate in a different way. I would even say that I myself feel very different in every language that I speak, because,
Yeah.
of course, of how fluent I can feel in a different language. But there's also part of your identity that goes with the language. So in my case, I've spoken English since I'm little because that's my mom's native language. But I still feel that my language is Spanish. That's the one language that I feel I relate the most to. And I also feel very confident speaking Italian, and I love speaking French. So it's very interesting how you can relate to every language. And now I'm trying to learn Arabic, which is the most challenging language that I'm trying to learn. But also, even with what I've learned so far in Arabic, it's beautiful to see, the way that many of the words are compound, how you have solar words and lunar words, and the way that you write the language, and the way that you anchor the roots of the words to develop different words. So there's so many things about language that are so important when it comes to culture.
I love that. And I definitely agree. I think there's so many things that when you can relate to people, you can understand the culture better simply because of some of the words that one culture has and the other one doesn't. You understand the roots of them, the people, but it's also some words are just lost in translation. The humor doesn't translate the terms. And yeah, like my sisters and I, we mix in maybe three languages sometimes when we speak, and it makes us understand each other in another level. So sometimes to an outsider, it sounds really bizarre, but I think that's what a lot of my friends are like that. It's what makes us a little bit different in that close community where we understand each other and we don't need the translation.
Definitely. And there are words that you cannot find translation, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I can think of empalagado, which is a word in Spanish that we use when you eat too much sweet, you are empalagado. So there's no translation for that. And I could think of many other words, but it's just so beautiful that we actually find like very specific linguistic ways of trying to interpret like the way that we feel. So it's very nice.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's so beautiful. And, you were talking about when you lived in Netherlands, you were cycling a lot, and generally you have a very active lifestyle, a lot of sports. I was wondering if, participating in kind of marathons and Ironman that you've done in other sports competitions has influenced your professional life as well, if and how it kind of embeds. Maybe you've experienced it differently living in different places.
So I think, of course, I love doing sports, and everybody who knows me knows that I'm a big advocate of practicing sports. I think I started practicing sports since I was very young. And my first sport was basketball. And I was very lucky that I, like some of my best friends in life, are still my friends that I started playing basketball when I was 8 years old. And, for me, sports is about having healthy habits. But I think, again, it goes to the fact of developing specific skills and values that I don't think you can do in anything else in your life, right? And I can tell you, because of my passion to sports, I do think I have very healthy habits. I'm very disciplined. I like working with the team. I like being strategic. And probably, I always like to do this metaphor with basketball. In order to win the game, we need to have a good strategy and a good captain that could lead the play. And then, of course, you need like the different skills, and you need different skills that can play together. So for me, what I learned through sports has been very determinant in my life. So you learn to win, you learn to lose, you learn to work hard in order to achieve specific goals. So I've run like marathons, I've run the Ironman, and there's no way you could do that if you're not constant and disciplined in really kind of like practicing and having the habit of doing it in a way that you reach the goal. But I guess for me, the most beautiful thing about sports, and especially this very like kind of like endurance kind of races, like running a marathon or climbing some of the big mountains and that I've done, I think it's acknowledging that doing this kind of a sport gives you like a lot of mental strength. So you realize that many times it's not even your body that is going to take you there, but it's actually your mind and your strength in your mind to cope with things, right? Like you know that if you want to reach the goal, you really have to work towards that, and you have to be very focused, and you have to be very mindful to reach that goal. So I think I love that about sports is that it really shows you how much you're capable of doing. And sometimes this overcomes your own strength, right? And many times my friends are like, you're going on vacations and you're climbing mountains. What kind of rest is that? And for me, it is, because when I'm in the mountains, I'm in my happy place. I'm thinking about beautiful things. I'm reconnecting with nature. I'm reconnecting with the world. I'm reconnecting with myself and my strength. I've done a lot of bikepacking trips. So once I went from Italy to the Netherlands, I also did another very long bikepacking trip from Italy to Scotland. And this was me alone on my bike. And also kind of like overcoming different challenges when you get a puncture, when you get into a busy road, when you get lost, when it starts raining, when it's too sunny. And I think just acknowledging that you have the capacity to kind of navigate all these situations, it's also just like life, it makes you stronger to just know that you can deal with anything, that you have the resilience to deal with those things as far as you're able to manage the way that you're feeling. And last but not least, I truly believe that practicing sports also brings a lot of mental health to people. So I always say that my mental therapy is always like practicing at least 1 hour of being active every day. So I do try to be active at least 1 hour a day, either cycling or running or walking or swimming. But I do try to be active at least 1 hour a day. And for me, this helps. It allows me to kind of release all the bad energies, recharge myself, and just get back to the core things that I like doing, and just get rid of bad energies. I really, for me, this is an important part of my life, an important pillar. And of course, even in very stressful times in my life, I really think that having this possibility of doing sports has allowed me to cope with things in a positive way.
Yeah, that's really interesting when you talk about it that way too, because definitely it has been more and more of a trend for people to do sports, to be active. And that doesn't only help your physical body, but just like you said, it helps your mental health. It helps your emotional regulation. It helps balance your hormones. It helps just have that mindset, exactly like teamwork and overcoming difficulties. I definitely agree. I think it is sometimes more of a struggle to be active when you're working than others. And it was a big challenge for a lot of people during the pandemic as well to just keep active while being trapped at home, which affected people's mental health a lot. And to kind of circle back into the sports and the culture, how interestingly they are intertwined. And I was wondering, in all your extensive experience in social work and education, do you think those two aspects influence education and children's or adults' learning in any way?
Yes, and I think now there's a lot of evidence of how being active also enables, especially with young children, right? Like the more active you are, the better opportunities of learning, and the effect on your brain is actually very positive, right? And that starts very early in life. So one of the problems that we're seeing in the modern world is that children move less And actually moving is healthy, and it's healthy not just because of like physical consequences, but also because of emotional consequences. So I think when we talk about like young children, especially, and that's a part of the work that I'm currently doing in Abu Dhabi, but that I have been doing for the last almost 2 decades, is reinforcing young children to be active and to play actively. And when I'm saying play actively is of course moving, but it's also interacting with others. So I think one of the things of the modern world that we have to be very careful is that the time that children spend in screens. And I think that we're not going to deny that screens and technology are here to stay. But for me, it's a matter of understanding, okay, what is the right balance of like screen time versus being active versus being outdoors, connecting with real people, because I do feel there's enough evidence to confirm that we human beings, like, we need to be in touch with other people. We need to be in touch with nature. We need to be active. Overweight and obesity is one of the worst pandemics that the world is having, because it's really not helping young children to develop in a healthy way, because it does have an effect in their physical well-being, in their emotional well-being, in their cognitive development, which many people might not know. So a child that's overweight and an obese child will not have the same capacity to learn that a child that has like a normal weight. So I think when you relate all of these things together, of course, that having a healthy lifestyle that allows you to be an active person, that also allows you um, to feel good with yourself, will definitely be shown in the way that you learn, in the way that you perform at a professional level, in the way that you perform even like emotionally, because there are things that happen because of you being active. And I think there's a lot to say on that, and the neuroscience and the effects that being active generates in the brain of people. But the main thing I would say is that there's enough evidence that we have to know that being active is not just about physical health, it's about mental health, it's about emotional health.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting too. We all know that it does, but we're not quite sure how. Usually, healthy habits lead to more successful people. We can just often see, but it's very interesting that you put it that way. Would you say that there's misconceptions about success and becoming successful, especially in relation to healthy?
Yes, I think there are definitely like misconceptions of success, because I think there's a lot of influence on like nowadays we see like a part of being successful is, having and reaching ABC. And a lot of that has to do with material well-being. Like, I'm successful if I can have like a good job, and I can live in what could be standardized as a nice house, or a lot of that can be related to economic well-being. But I think what we are learning in humanity, and probably, and I want to believe that after the pandemic, we did learn that there's a lot of success that needs to be related to the well-being of human beings, and that means, actually, for me, success, at least, I want to see success as the possibility of really developing yourself, and to help to acknowledge that you have like a full life to flourish, but that you have to make the best of your life on whatever that means to you, not to what that means to others. And of course, for me, success has to do about being able to contribute to humanity in a positive way. So more than an individualistic way of seeing success, I believe in collective success, like in collective well-being, and really trying to promote that understanding that we are human beings that depend on other human beings, which means that we need to care about the community around us. And it's not just about our own personal well-being, but it's about the well-being of all the other people surrounding us immediately, but also surrounding us beyond the immediate context, right? So I like to think that we believe in we live in one planet, and that one planet is our home. So if we take care of our home as a whole, we're all going to be doing better than if we just see our own individual space. And I think human beings are learning probably in the hard way because of some of the consequences that we're seeing on climate change and the impact of climate change in people, and especially in the most vulnerable people. And I think we're going to have to learn even more in the next couple of years. But I'm confident, and I want to be very positive that humanity will work a way to understand that success is not around economic well-being or shallow things that cannot necessarily fulfill your life. I think life is too short to just think about economic well-being. I think we need to fulfill our lives with experiences, with emotions, with sharing, with learning, with seeing, with making the most of the moments and the special moments that we can create in through our life. So less about what we have and more about what we feel and live and experience.
And be actual human beings. Truly,
Yes. Yes.
just like,
And when it comes to education, you were saying, because I sometimes feel like what needs to change drastically sometimes is probably this way, not having like this one goal that in order to do better, there's one pathway to do that. But actually there are multiple pathways and in multiple ways of seeing what can fulfill us in different ways.
of course, and we're taught to look at things one way oftentimes. And growing up is exploring the different options, making mistakes safely. And just like what you said about, communal success, it's, again, what EdHeroes is about. What a lot of people are coming to is having a community, a sense of community. When you share your success, when you help, when you do good, a lot more comes out tenfold because the entire community always uplifts each other. There is no individualism. In individualism, you're completely alone and stranded. But when you do have people to share success, you have humane aspirations and humane goals. I think it does truly improve the quality of life. And of course, it's a whole other long conversation, but it's definitely many people
Yeah.
try to measure happiness, but possibly happiness is a good estimate of success, maybe.
And happiness, and then happiness, how do we measure happiness? I
Yeah,
remember
of
having
course.
this discussion with a very good friend of mine, and we were talking about, maybe a good way to measure happiness could be around time and the time well spent on leisure activities. So imagine if we could have an index that compares the happiness, and probably poorer people could be more happy in many ways, because maybe they have more time for themselves, or more time with their families, or more time to practice their hobbies, or more time to spend in nature. So I think a lot of the happiness could probably be measured by time and time well spent in different ways. But I was just having a very deep conversation with one of my colleagues here in Abu Dhabi, and we were talking actually of Abu Dhabi. I would say people here have a good quality of living, and of course I think very different from my home country. I think most of the basic needs in Abu Dhabi are covered, and there's still social gaps and things that need to be addressed. But in general, I think that the quality of life in Abu Dhabi is probably one of the best in around the world. But what we were talking, that sometimes too much well-being and too much wealth can also bring other kind of problems, because maybe somebody can have everything from an economical perspective, but this can also trigger the fact that we're missing other things. And this doesn't necessarily mean that we have a life that we feel fulfilled in many different ways. And I think this is quite interesting, because sometimes if probably having more needs makes you become more resilient to different things, because you have to adapt, and you have to be flexible, and you have to fight for things, and you cannot take things for granted, because you really need to work hard to change many of these things. Well, many times if you have everything covered, then you become more vulnerable, because you just stop learning which are the different skills that you need to develop in order to fulfill other needs. So having said that, I just think it's so difficult to find the right balance, but I definitely think that um, that well-being does have to do with many different aspects, and that we need to make sure that whenever we're talking about well-being and success, it's about like fulfilling our own purpose in life.
Yeah. My mother used to say, "You are alive when you have wants, when you want something, when you have needs." Just like you said, a lot of the time we think that all that our wants should be materialistic. And then at a certain point, you look around and you realize, did I really want them, or what do I think of now? And it's that constant search of what should I want. I guess it's also something to be taught of how to listen to yourself, to really feel what you might want. For example, a leisurely walk could be so satisfying, and it's something that you could just want, and it's not something that you can buy or aspire to, but it's just constantly listening to yourself to understand what your goals are, what your wants are, what your aspirations are, and to be able to walk that way, towards them. Yeah.
And having like a big purpose in life, and I've had many interesting conversations with different leaders, but I come to believe that those people that really kind of like lead with the example and are, because it's, you find in them like a strong sense of purpose on what they do. And I want to believe that, in my case, as I was sharing at the beginning of this conversation, I do feel I have this strong purpose of life of promoting social justice. And this means that I care for this, and I care from every single thing that I do in my life. I care on the fact that I want to make sure that whatever I do is to be fair, is to work for the most vulnerable. So that's why I'm so interested, for example, working with young children and early childhood development, because I'm convinced that investing in the early years is the best investment you can do and the highest return that you can get. But it's also because I want to make sure that we're investing in those that don't have a voice. And for me, that's an act of social justice. So for me, like if I can ever like give an advice to anyone, I'm like, find your purpose in life. Like, what is that big purpose that moves you, that is that you're always gonna feel connected? Because then, even working doesn't feel like working. It just feels that you're advocating for that one thing that you really hold strongly to. And I don't know, it just feels right. Like you feel that you're doing something that is fulfilling you because you strongly believe in that. So I think that's what makes people become very passionate about something, is when they have like a very strong purpose in life.
Definitely agree. And just like you said, if you measure happiness in time well spent, then when you're doing something that you really, really love, it never feels like work, and you're not separating into leisure time and, work time. And this time makes me happy, but this doesn't. When you have a purpose and you're doing something and you're seeing the benefits, it makes you so happy.
Right. It's because I love my work. I care about my work. I care about children. I care about social policies. I care about education, about like health and all the things that affect human beings. I care. And I've been super lucky that all of the different jobs that I've done through my life have, of course, contributed to this big cause and purpose. So honestly, it doesn't feel like, of course, and when I was a minister, I was working like 17 hours a day, but we had a big political project that meant that we wanted to get things done and right. And I didn't mind working 17 hours a day. This was part of my purpose in life, and I had to do it at a specific time of my life. It's interesting because now there's this whole debate between the right balance between work and life, and the life-work balance and all of these things. I'm always a little bit skeptical because I don't really see that balance, like there's never like a real balance in life. Like sometimes life at some point it's going to be like I have a lot more free time because I'm less stressed for work, but maybe there are other times that's going to be the other way around. I don't know. I find it difficult to think like about a perfect life balance, life work balance. If you're very passionate about the work that you do, it's always going to go up and down. It's never going to
Absolutely.
be very balanced.
I think it's something that the current generation is just starting to come to, is that a lot of the corporate jobs are soul sucking, and they just feel so empty inside, that there needs to be a work-life balance. They need to have no boundaries, because sometimes it's the corporations that set the example of, overworking, of not treating humans like human beings. And maybe this is where it comes in. But truly, just like you said, when you have a purpose, or at least a desire, a want, I think finding a purpose, I've had this question for a long time. What is my purpose in life? Do I have this purpose? Then I don't
Maybe you
know.
have several purposes, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you never know.
And
But
Alina,
it's
you
just
mentioned boundaries because I think that is another interesting thing that is
yeah.
probably as important as having a strong purpose, right? Because I mean, you might be caught in a situation that your purpose in life is so strong that you have no boundaries, and maybe
Yeah.
that is also risky, right? Because
For sure.
then where is the balance? So I guess having a strong purpose in life with the right boundaries to understand, okay, yes, this is my big purpose in life, but I need to establish these boundaries. So probably for me, the balance goes beyond like this work-life balance. It's more about like, okay, if I have a strong purpose in life, how do I set the right boundaries so I can try to have this more kind of like balance between what I want to do from a professional perspective, from a personal perspective, from a human perspective, all of this different pathways that you need to keep in mind. But yes, I love the fact that you brought the boundaries into the conversation. That I do believe that is very important. Also, boundaries or sometimes it's red lines. What I've learned through my professional life, it's actually very important to have red lines on understanding, okay, I can be flexible to some things, but I also have some very strong red
Yeah.
lines, especially when you work in politics, like in politics, you have to be very smart and clever to navigate the political system. But I think at some point you also have to be absolutely clear on which are your red lines, like which are the things that you're not going to go beyond that because that has like ethical consequences because of many different things. And I think that's also very important to set which are your red lines because that allows you to make decisions quite easily, right? It's setting those boundaries, setting those red lines, understanding which are the clear pathways that you want to go through.
Absolutely, because the gray area can just keep extending, in certain at times, and we've all seen this happen way too often. So I definitely agree. It's having understanding that, of course, there is a leeway, but also knowing that there is some, just like you said, boundaries, some no's, and it's knowing, I guess, yourself, knowing your ethical and moral standards, understanding what you are okay with. Yeah. And you have such an interesting background work, and you have so many more things to do. Just to kind of finish us off, I was wondering, is there anything that you're most looking forward to in your future work?
No, now I've become very passionate about working at a city level. So, I've worked at a national level. I mean, in Ecuador, I kind of like started my career teaching at the university, which I absolutely loved because, many of my students were actually very close to my age. But I taught for a long time. Even when I started working, I kept teaching. For me, teaching was always the opportunity of keeping myself updated on different topics, but also it was this beautiful opportunity to bridge whatever I was learning with others. So it's a nice way to give back to society. So I would definitely would like to go back to teaching at some point because I think that now, even with the broader experience, having worked at an international level in many different cultures, probably what I can give back, it's even more interesting than when I started teaching way back in my professional initial career. But what I was going to say, so I started working a lot in rural areas in Ecuador with indigenous communities. So I'm pretty familiar with the rural world, and I love it. And I think that's as I was mentioning, this kind of like mark and establish my way of living and thinking about the world. And then I kind of like did a lot of work at a national level in Ecuador, being a minister, coordinating the social sector. So for me, that was one of the most beautiful opportunities. I do believe working in the public service is something that I really value because I think it's the best way to have impact, and especially in a country like mine where you can make the difference if you have the political will to make the difference. And then, of course, when I was working in the Vernon Malia Foundation, I had this beautiful opportunity to work at a global level and kind of like reach the world in an international organization that has a very interesting work and footprint. So I'm very proud of having done that. And now working in Abu Dhabi in such a different context and culture and such a beautiful place to be. That if you ask me what would you want to do next, I do think I have clarity that I would want to go back to my country. I do feel that I would love, and I'm currently I'm doing a lot of work around cities, and that has become one of my biggest passions is understanding, the well-being of people is not just about the programs and facilities that they can have in their immediate environment and the access to different opportunities. I think that caring about the way that we're building and planning cities is very important. So I hope I will continue to do work in that field of work. And of course, thinking about what is the impact of working in cities, especially in the most vulnerable people living in cities. And I know that at least 70% of the population will be living in cities by 2030. So I do want to make sure that if I'm contributing to something, it's going to be something meaningful. And hopefully back in my country, which I would love to go back. So that is, I think that I'm leaning into that.
Yeah, I mean, that's very exciting. I think you have so much more ahead, and I love the plans, going back to teaching a lot more things ahead. Wish you the best of luck from EdHeroes, and we're so happy to have you on our board. I think our conversations can go on for a long time. Um, I just want to thank you so much for being here today on our podcast on EdHeroes Voices. Thank you again, Cecilia. It would be a pleasure to have you with us again, and we're truly thankful for all your insights today.
Thank you. Thank you, Alina. And it's always, thank you for sharing with me this space because, sometimes we don't have an opportunity to share who we are, what we really think from deep inside. So I think this is a beautiful opportunity just to share a little bit of who I am.
Perfect. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned something new. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more inspiring stories from around the world. Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.